Hi, everybody. I'm Shauna. I'm one of the case managers at the Justice Resource Center. We're going to be I'm actually going to be talking at you, and I apologize for that. This group together. I want to just say up front, I appreciate y'all working with us and being flexible and coming to these online groups, and we're here if there's anything we can do to support you, whether that has anything to do with the requirements for diversion or not. We know this is a really challenging time for a lot of people, and we're here to support you however we can, so please don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything we can do to point you in the direction of resources or even just talk out what you might be going through. So that being said, today we're going to talk about acceptance and commitment therapy, and we're going to just jump right in. So let's go. Y'all, I don't know about you, but sometimes for me, it can be really helpful for me to just think about things in a different way, to kind of like have a new, fresh lens to see my life, to see how I've been doing things. And that is a way that you can think about acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. And so we're going to talk about these kind of core processes, these really foundational ideas that make up ACT. And those are acceptance or willingness. We'll talk more about that. Values, what's important to each of us individually. Our values are going to be unique to us. Committed action is what types of things do we as humans do to achieve our values, to get closer to our values, to do the things that are meaningful to us in our lives. And present moment, which is, can I be here in this moment without getting pulled too far in the future and being anxious about all the things that could go wrong, or being pulled too far into the past and kind of being sad about how things have gone wrong in the past. Self as context and diffusion are also really important parts of ACT, but just for the sake of time, we're not going to focus as much on those today. If this is something that's interesting to you and you get on board with what this might be like to adopt into your daily life, there's plenty of information out there where you can continue to learn about that. So getting started, we're going to talk about this idea of acceptance. And you can choose to think about acceptance however it makes the most sense to you. Some people like to think about it as accepting the world and the circumstances of their life as it shows up. So no matter what I experience, if it's a challenging emotion, if it's a really difficult experience, I'm able to accept it. You can also think about it as willingness, being willing to engage with the world as it is, being willing to experience difficult emotions, being willing to have adverse experiences or difficulties or challenges, and letting that inform how you show up in the world. So it's not saying acceptance and willingness is not saying, all right, I just gotta, if the world's unfair, I just gotta let bad things happen to me, or I deserve all the unequal things that have happened to me, or I just gotta move over and accept it. That's not what it's saying. What it's saying is, I'm gonna stop struggling and trying to make my feelings and my lived experience be something that it's not. I'm gonna stop fighting against my experience and having this really rigid script that I think I need to follow. So for instance, if I lose a loved one, if I choose willingness, I'm choosing to accept that difficult experience as part of my lived experience. I'm choosing to engage with difficult emotions like grief and loss and letting that inform how I show up in the world. If I don't choose acceptance or willingness, I might say something like, this is unfair, this wasn't supposed to happen, the world is such a shitty place, what's the point, right? And I'm fighting against my experience because I'm trying to make it something else. I'm trying not to feel those feelings. And oftentimes, that's what we do as humans. When we feel something that we don't want to feel, or when we have a life experience that's really challenging and dysregulating, we fight against it. We aren't willing, we aren't accepting. So take a couple minutes, y'all, and just think about maybe some experiences in your life when you've either had a really strong emotion that you didn't want to feel or an experience that you didn't want to feel. And what was that like? What are some of the things that maybe you did in that situation? So let's give a concrete example to kind of flesh this out. So for me, rejection is one of those feelings where I'm like, I don't want it. I don't want anything to do with it. Don't care. So if I feel rejected, there's a number of things I might do, right? I could isolate, just go off and be by myself, distract myself with social media. I could get angry. Like if someone rejects me, I could say, you know what, you're always doing this. You're such a jerk. I could pretend like I don't care. You know what? It wasn't important to me anyway, so don't even worry about it. Maybe get a little passive aggressive, right? I could watch TV, have a drink, self-sabotage, tell myself all the things that I might tell myself in that situation, that negative self-talk loop. Like, I'm not good enough. Like, of course that would happen. Why would you even think that that wouldn't happen? And the list goes on, right? And what all of these things have in common is that they're things I'm doing to control my experience and to just kind of distract myself from that feeling of rejection, right? To avoid that feeling as much as I possibly can. And maybe I'll isolate, then I'll self-sabotage, then I'll watch TV for a little while, then I'll go back to isolating. I mean, I could stay in this holding pattern, keeping myself busy with all of these activities for minutes, hours, days, weeks, like any number of time, just to not feel that rejection, right? So I start to feel the rejection and then I go back into this holding pattern of doing all the things to control my experience and to avoid that feeling of rejection. So maybe some of y'all can relate to this, right? Having a feeling, you really don't want to feel it, and maybe you've got your own personalized list of the things that you do and you don't want to feel it, right? You just want to have a little bit of control. You want to avoid it. So here's the thing. On my list, none of these things get rid permanently of that feeling of rejection for me. Short term, sure, I can use all these things to short term not feel it, but not a single thing on the list that I could spend hours, days, weeks, months, years doing gets to the root of that feeling and makes that feeling permanently go away. So this idea of being accepting and being willing is kind of speaking to, okay, well, instead of going on this wild goose chase and spending all of this time and energy doing all of these things to avoid this feeling, what would happen if I was willing to feel the feeling? If I was willing to stop trying to avoid and just feel the feeling as best I could for the time being. And for the most part, what we're doing for a large part of our lives is we're trying to control our experiences, be very rigid in controlling our experiences, and avoid things that we just don't want to have to deal with. And part of what can happen is we can get into these patterns where we're spending so much time working to control and avoid that we don't even realize what it is we value in life, what is most meaningful to us, who we are at our core, and what we're capable of, because we are spending so much of our time and energy in not feeling and in having a really strong grip on our experiences. So you can think about it as we're kind of limiting our potential because we have this really rigid idea about what we can handle, what we can't, what we want, what we don't want. And we're never allowing that to grow and change. And we spend a lot of our time doing that. So maybe you can think about your own personal patterns, and how this control and avoidance shows up for you. And there are a lot of things that can come about when we try to have this control and when we try to avoid. So yeah, in the short term, it probably works for a couple seconds, a couple minutes at a time. And when we try to control or avoid, oftentimes the things that we do to try to control or avoid go against what we want to happen. So let's go back to that rejection example, right? So if I feel rejected, it's because I wanted to feel connected to someone. I didn't get that, and I felt rejected. So then if I feel rejected and I want to control and avoid that feeling of rejection, what I might do is I might get angry and I might say to the person that's making me feel rejected, you know what? I want nothing to do with you. You're always like this. You have no consideration for how I feel, and get really angry and upset with them. And what I'm doing in trying to control that experience and avoid the feeling of rejection is I'm going against what I wanted to happen in the first place, which was that feeling of connection. And that's pretty common when we try to control and avoid. And another thing that happens is if I'm feeling rejected and I go and do all those things to try to avoid it and not engage with it, then oftentimes what happens is that feeling of rejection takes on more and more control in my life. I am fueled to keep doing the things to avoid it because it just almost gets bigger and bigger and harder to deal with. When I'm pushing it away, there's a struggle that gives it more power, if that makes sense. And maybe you can think of examples in your life where you've struggled with anxiety or sadness, and the more you try to control it, the more difficult it becomes to control it. So I don't know about y'all, but I am a big fan of avoiding avoidable suffering. And oftentimes what can happen is when we are trying so hard to control our experience, we are creating additional suffering. So what we're doing, and we talked about this a little bit before, when we struggle with something, it can almost become bigger and take on more strength in the process. So we can think about it as like if we're in a swimming pool and we have a beach ball, and the beach ball is the situation we don't want to deal with or the feeling we don't want to deal with, and I keep trying to shove it down under the water, it's going to keep popping up, right? And I'm just going to be engaged in this constant struggle with it, and the struggle itself then can become a source of suffering. And additionally, the things that we do sometimes to have control create additional suffering. So some people use substances, some people drink, some people get angry, and all of that, that means to control and avoid those reactions to whatever initially happened can create more complex problems, can create more suffering on top of whatever the feeling or situation was that we're trying to control or avoid. And the ways that we try to control and avoid can take a toll on our health, can take a toll on our finances, and just can be overall more harmful to our lives and to our loved ones. And again, the examples are getting angry, isolating, using substances, drinking, whatever the things to control and avoid that can have a larger lasting impact on our lived experience, more so than maybe initially experiencing that feeling or that situation. But instead, we completely blow it out of proportion and we kind of go off on this tangent following these efforts to control and avoid. And throughout the process, we're just creating a more and more complex problem with more and more unhealthy patterns just to not feel this one little thing that we didn't want to feel, or to not face the situation that we didn't want to face. And we're going away from what's most meaningful to us, away from what we initially wanted, because we're just off on this wild goose chase because we're so scared of accepting or being willing to engage with the moment as it is. And the thing is, y'all, sometimes the things that we try to control and avoid might be really important for us to experience. I know for me, a really relevant example of this is loss. I spent a lot of time trying to avoid the loss of a loved one in my life. And of course, it doesn't go away, right? It doesn't go away. And in fact, what I learned much later is the importance of experiencing that loss and really understanding that loss and allowing myself to grow and heal as a result of experiencing that loss. And that's not something for me that I could have done if I continued to control and avoid it. It would have continued to be a really raw source of pain for me instead of something that I experienced, I dealt with, I integrated into my story, and then was able to learn and grow from and not struggle with it as much. So, just something to think about. Sometimes what we avoid could potentially be helpful for us to experience and own as part of our story. And that's where this idea of acceptance or being willing, or however you want to think about it, however it makes sense to you, comes back into the fold. And I think the most important thing to think about, y'all, is there is always, always, always a choice with what we're willing to engage with. I am not here to tell y'all that for every single feeling you feel from now on, you've got to fully experience it in the moment. Don't try to control it. Don't try to avoid it. No way, man. I don't do that. I don't know many people that do that. There's always a choice with what you want to accept and what you are willing to engage with. And there are some times, again, going back to that example of grief and loss, where it might not be safe or helpful to practice willingness. And that's perfectly fine. You do it on your timeline. You do it when it makes sense to you. There's always a choice. And if this is an idea that you want to try on, you can choose, maybe there's one emotion, right, that really stands out to you, that whenever you get like the slightest inkling of that emotion, you go into that avoidance or control. Maybe it's shame, maybe it's rejection, maybe it's loss. Maybe that's one you want to practice. Maybe it'll be certain times of day, right? Like in the morning when you have a feeling, you're willing to engage with it. Maybe it'll be for an hour each day, or 20 minutes each day, even 20 seconds each day. The whole point is, if this is something you want to try, you get to choose how it's going to look for you because you know yourself best. And there's a lot of different ways that you can play around with it if you want to try it. And just like with anything, y'all, it's something to be learned. If we've spent our whole life working to avoid and control our experiences, it's gonna feel really odd to be accepting or be willing when we have one of those strong feelings or emotions that we don't want to have. So it's just something to be learned and something that we can have patience with ourselves if we choose to try it, because we're essentially rewiring our brains and we're creating a new habit. And another thing is it can be really challenging to lose control, especially if controlling or avoiding has helped us to feel at times for the short term more calm, more capable. It's going to feel really dysregulating and really challenging to not have control over a feeling or situation. And ensuring that you have skills to help you ground and skills to help you cope is going to be really helpful if you choose to practice this. And then just offering ourselves validation, self-validation. When we're no longer trying to control or avoid feelings, we're allowing ourselves to kind of come more into ourselves. We're allowing ourselves to influence and be influenced by our lived experience rather than having this part of ourselves that's just constantly working to control and avoid and yes this and no this. And a final thing that can help is just not having judgment about whatever those thoughts and feelings are, about our tendency to control or our tendency to want to avoid. Just having an awareness or being mindful of that and coupling that with the self-compassion, right? It's okay that I think this way. It's okay that I want to avoid this or control this right now. And just letting yourself be aware of what that process looks like for you. Y'all, I love this because I feel like it just ties it all together. This quote, "When suffering knocks at your door and you say there's no seat for him, he tells you not to worry because he's brought his own stool." And really, this whole conversation about being willing and accepting, I love this quote because it just ties it all together. We can't possibly control and avoid every situation and every emotion in our lives. We just can't. And this is more about, can we coexist with it, right? So when suffering comes, brings his own chair, has a seat, can I still go about my house and do the things that I enjoy? Can I still go and do the things that give me meaning and connect with my loved ones, even though suffering's sitting right there? Can I coexist with suffering until suffering's ready to leave, instead of just sitting there and staring suffering down and thinking, oh my God, this is awful, or doing everything I can to not go in the same room as suffering where he's sitting and avoiding him at all costs and making my life more inconvenient to just not have to deal with him? Can I, as best I can, coexist with whatever that emotion or experience is? And that's what it really boils down to. Hopefully you guys are hanging in there. Hopefully you're okay. I can't see you. So we're going to keep moving, and hopefully you are not asleep. Values, we've talked about being willing, acceptance, these efforts to control and avoid our experience. Values are the other core component of acceptance and commitment therapy. And values are different for all of us. What do we personally value? And it's going to be different depending on where we are developmentally, what our most important relationships in our life are, what our life experiences are, how we were raised, what types of hopes and ideas we have for our future. All of our values are going to be different, and that's the beauty of it. And the other part of it is, how often do we consider what we value in our everyday lives, in our day-to-day decisions? When we think about what we're going to do next or how we're going to plan, or even just our mundane interactions with the people in our lives, how often are we thinking about what we value? And how often do those values impact the way we do things, whether they're small things or big things? How often do my values influence my behavior? How often do they make me do the things that I do instead of just some rote routine that I am doing all the time without really thinking about why I do things the way I do them? And so some values, just to sort of start the conversation about what they are, how they're different for everyone. Values run the gamut, y'all. You could value humor, creativity, independence, respect, persistence. And there's a lot of cool free websites where you can go and learn what are your top values. Because for most of us, we're probably like, yeah, I know what I value. But then if we really had to sit and like narrow it down to what are our 5 most important values that give our lives the most meaning, that we most want to adhere to, it can be a struggle because we think we know, but really when we have to pare it down and really have to think about who's the core, what's the core of who we are, it can be tricky. And that's the beauty of ACT, is it gives you the opportunity to kind of prioritize your values and think about, for you at this part of your life, what's meaningful to you and what roadmaps do you want to live your life by based on what's most important to you. So once we do the personal work to figure out what we personally value, and it will be different for each of us, but once we know what we value, the next step and the next core process of ACT is committed action. And that is just a fancy way of saying, okay, these are my values. And because these are the things that are most meaningful to me, that I feel really make me who I am and are going to grow me into the person I want to be, I am committed to acting in ways that align with these values. Everything I do is going to be in the direction of these values, is going to be informed by these values. And the beauty of committed action is we always have the choice to respond by enacting our values. No matter how big a situation or how small a situation, I can always use my values to dictate how I'm going to respond. So if I value kindness, I can, in any situation I'm in, think, what is a way that I can embody kindness? What is the most kind way I can deal with this situation? How can I show up with kindness? And so a way to think about it is, if our values are a compass, then committed actions are a step in the direction that we want to go. So if my value is kindness, I can be constantly moving towards kindness, but just like a direction on a compass, if I'm going north, I'm never going to get to north, right? I can always be moving and headed north, but I'm never going to get there. Same with kindness. Kindness is my value. It's the direction I'm moving, knowing that it's not a goal. I'm never going to get there. But all of these things that I choose to incorporate in my life and the behaviors I choose to incorporate in my life are going to continue moving me in that direction. It's just going to continue moving me closer. And then also, the thing with committed action is it helps us to carry on. It's meaning making, to, instead of acting out in a way to try to control our experiences and avoid certain situations or avoid certain emotions, committed action is saying, no, I get to choose. I get to choose. I get to create meaning in my life. And no matter what happens, no matter how unfair, how uncertain, how unpredictable my life is, I pick these values as what's going to create meaning and what's going to get me through the day and what's going to inform every choice I make, because this is what's important to me. This is the core of who I am. And none of this outside world can change that, because I'm always going to have committed action to pursue these values. And in doing so, the other thing we're doing is we're keeping our focus on what's most meaningful to us instead of going into this negative trajectory of all of these negative feelings and sensations that might come up when we try to control and avoid. So if I'm always focused on my values, then I am far less likely to get into this negative self-talk of, well, what's the point? Why should I even try? I'll never be able to do that anyway. Or last time I tried something like this, it didn't work out. Because I'm focusing on what's most meaningful to me and not focusing on trying to rationalize why I shouldn't do something. And when we can allow our values to point us in the right direction, rather than allowing all the negative thoughts and self-talk to direct us, that can really change our outlook and our perspective day to day. And just like with acceptance and being willing, committed action is a choice. I think if each of us sat back and looked at our day we would be blown away with just how many choice points are in our day. Everything as little as what time am I going to get up? What am I going to have for breakfast? What am I going to do next? To should I reach out to this person? How should I respond to this comment? There's just so many choice points in our day. And oftentimes, what we use to kind of navigate us through those choice points is control. We want to control everything we're doing. We want to have control over our experience, and avoidance. We want to avoid negative consequences. But committed action is each action is a conscious choice based on what's most important to you. And it's a chance to, in each and every one of those little tiny choice points in your day, make a commitment to what's important to you personally. And so, all that being said, a lot of times the reason that we don't engage our values in all of our choice points and constantly try to move closer to our values by doing things that are enacting our values is because moving towards something that's important to us can be really scary and really dysregulating. So, for instance, if I value love, right on the other side of love is the possibility of loss, right? If I value connection and community, right on the other side of that is rejection. If I value success, I know that failure is right there as a possibility, and that alone can cause people to want to stay as far away from what's most important to them as possible because they're unable and unwilling to risk the possibility of not having that. And that's for a lot of us where that control and avoidance comes in. I don't even want to try to get close to that because I cannot handle the thought of not having that, or failing, or feeling rejected, or feeling alone, or whatever that is. And then what we do in doing that and not even trying to move closer to what's meaningful to us is we're just kind of in this holding pattern. We're just kind of in this loop, not getting close and not having experiences with the things that are most important to us because we don't want to risk the possibility of negative consequences in the process. And that moves us into this idea of present moment, which is another core process of ACT. And I love this quote, "Our true home is the present moment." What present moment is about is respite from trying to control, trying to avoid. It's respite from being pulled too far into the future with all the anxieties about how this could go wrong. It's respite from being pulled too far into the past and being reminded of all the times that things have not gone well in the past. It's coming in contact with our experience. It's an opportunity to be accepting, an opportunity to be willing, and just experiencing the present moment for what it is without our rigid expectations and without thinking too much about our past and our future, but letting ourselves exist in the present moment. So what present moment doesn't mean is like, hey man, only worry about what's happening right now. That's it. No, because we need to think about the future. We need to plan ahead. And we need to be able to learn from things that have happened in the past. So we need to be able to think about the past. What present moment is saying, can we find the moments when it's actually the best thing for us to be in the present moment? And if that's to embody our values, right? If I'm in a really challenging situation and I'm so in the future thinking about every possible thing that's going to go wrong, and then I move straight to the past and I think about all the times it's gone wrong before, yeah, I can use some of that information to help. And also, if I bring myself to the present moment and I choose to embody my values, then I'm really harnessing the power of what I want to happen, what's most meaningful to me, and being in the present moment to make that decision and not fusing with thoughts from my past or thoughts from a future that hasn't happened yet. Some other ways that this idea of being in the present moment as much as possible can be helpful is when we're having those difficult, challenging feelings in the moment. Can we be willing, can we accept them and be in the present moment without kind of like remembering all the other times that that's happened and that kind of elevating everything and making it feel more intense, or without worrying about, well, yeah, I'm feeling this now and what's this going to lead to? It's going to lead to so many more difficult emotions and so many more difficult things are going to happen. But can we allow ourselves to be in the present moment instead of fighting against a feeling and trying to control and manage it? It also encourages us to show up for our own lives. Y'all, how many times have you driven somewhere and not remember how you got there? Or cooked a meal and not really remembered all the steps that you did? Like in the middle of a recipe, you're like, did I already add that or not? And so many times we're on autopilot and we're not truly present in our lives for ourselves and for the people that we love and care about. So the more we can try to be present in each moment, however mundane, the more present we are for ourselves and those that we love. And the other thing we're doing is we're stepping out of that crazy world where like everything is narrated, everything is what we're doing, and everything's pros and cons and really problem solving. Instead, we're just focusing on what is our experience in this time, in this place, in this body, and focusing on that and valuing that. And all of this relates to being willing to engage with life as it is. And all of this also relates to, what do I value? If I can bring myself to the present moment, I'm going to best be able to embody my values moving forward when I make this decision, or even in just how I am right now, I can embody my values if I engage with the present moment. And another word that many of you have probably heard is mindfulness. And that's very similar to present moment. Mindfulness is just, can I be in this moment now instead of 8 million other places? And it impacts how we think about ourselves. When we connect with the present moment, we create psychological flexibility, right? We're not working from a script where I should do this should be happening. We're giving up some of that control that we've talked about. And in doing so, we create a more flexible sense of self. If I'm constantly able to be in the present moment and adapt to the present moment without always trying to do the things to not feel this or to control this, then I'm cultivating this ability to be adaptable and to be flexible. And in addition, it's understanding ourselves as a process. We're ever changing. We are ever adapting. We're always going to have to be ready for things to be different than we expected. And the more time we engage in the present moment and we get out of that really restrictive, rigid script in our head, the better able we are to do that. And there's plenty of other benefits to mindfulness, y'all. We're more likely to appreciate life. We become more engaged with others. We're able to become more resilient and cope with stressors. We become less preoccupied. We're more likely to connect with one another. It can be helpful with stress, lower blood pressure. It helps with issues of chronic pain. It can improve sleep. If we experience a lot of stress, we can have some stomach and gastrointestinal irritation because our nervous system is always really amped up. And the more we practice mindfulness, the more that can improve and we can have better internal health as far as our digestion goes as well. Also, it can help with depression, it can help with substance use, eating disorders, anxiety disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder. Mindfulness and the idea of being in the present moment is brought into so many different types of therapy for so many different mental health issues, and there's a lot of research out there about its benefits. And something that might be helpful to hear if you're like, yeah, that's great, I want to start doing that, but how? Try just going with the flow. There's never going to be a time and place where it's like, okay, I'm finally relaxed, things are finally going well in my life, I can finally take a time out and try to be in the present moment. That's likely not going to happen for any of us. So being mindful is just paying attention to our body sensations, our emotions, our thoughts, and not having judgment, remaining neutral as we notice our moment-to-moment experience. So you don't have to be all zen and meditating in order to be in the present moment. You can be angry and be mindful. You can be sad and be mindful. You can be excited and happy and be mindful. It's just about noticing what's happening. And when we bring our attention back to our experience, where are we in the room? What does that look like? What does that smell like? What does that sound like? What does that taste like? Using all our senses to bring us back, we're engaging in mindfulness. We're practicing being in the present moment. And if you want to try it, just like anything we try for the first time, it's okay to feel frustrated by the process of it. Our brains aren't used to not multitasking. Our brains aren't used to just staying in one spot and focusing on what's happening with our emotions, with our thoughts, with our body sensations. And just like with anything we do in life, the more we practice, the easier it becomes. The more likely we are to do it again in the future, the more it becomes a habit. And so if this is something that you want to try, think about like what are some realistic ways you could incorporate that into your life and into your routine. So I appreciate y'all hanging in there with me. I know that this is not the ideal way to get information to you without being able to see you and with me just kind of talking at you. Do not hesitate to give me feedback. You can call, you can email, however you want to do that. If you want more information about anything that was talked about, please let me know. And again, I want to reiterate, these are really challenging times. It's a situation that's much bigger than all of us. So if you need help or support or just to be pointed in the direction of some resources, we are here for you. Please do not hesitate to reach out with anything that you might need during this challenging time. So I hope that y'all are staying safe and healthy, and I look forward to talking with y'all soon. Bye-bye.